Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Greta Thunberg, the 16-year-old climate change activist, has launched a strongly worded attack on world leaders, accusing them of betraying her generation through their inaction on global warming. But a number of heads of state have stayed away from the UN climate summit. From New York, here's our North America correspondent, Nick Bryant.
A sweltering September scorcher in New York City. Not much sign of autumn here. And it hasn't just been a long summer, but north of the equator, the hottest ever on record. So today at the Riverside headquarters of the United Nations, an urgent climate action summit. This global body once more sounding the alarm. The world is losing the race against climate change. In this air-conditioned auditorium, the heat came from the 16-year-old Swedish activist Greta Thunberg. The UN hoping to harness what's being called the Greta effect, her ability to mobilize the young and to shame the old. And my, how she did that today.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you.
For the grown-ups in the room, it was awkward. But they applauded nonetheless.
Mr. President,
the world's most powerful adult only briefly stopped by. Greta Thunberg watched from the side, scowling as he arrived. He didn't address the summit himself. He's withdrawing America from the Paris Climate Change Accord. And he took the chair of a rival event organised by the White House at the UN on religious persecution. For once, Donald Trump was upstaged by a teenager with a furious speech that will echo down the generations. Well, you think of some of the famous speeches of the past, the Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev banging his shoe on the lectern. Fidel Castro used to go on for hours, but this was one of the most electrifying moments in UN history. Question is, can that anger translate into action?
Nick Bryant, thank you.
Now, the teenager who inspired millions to take to the streets in a historic global protest over climate change has given a passionate speech to world leaders at the United Nations Climate Summit in New York. 16-year-old Greta Thunberg accused governments of stealing childhoods through their inaction. She and 15 other teens filed a complaint with the UN, alleging 5 of the world's leading economies have failed to uphold their obligations under the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Siobhan Kennedy is in New York now. Siobhan.
Well, Kathy, no exaggeration to say this was an impassioned and scathing speech from Greta Thunberg here this morning. Fresh from leading the world's biggest climate march in New York on Friday, she was back in the spotlight again today, and she really set the conference on fire, Kathy, with her bold message. At points she was tearful, as much with rage as anything else. Let's hear a clip from her now.
People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
The irony is this is, of course, a global climate summit here in New York, taking place on US soil, but without the participation of the US President Donald Trump himself. There was a moment today when the President and Greta did briefly cross paths, although I think you can see from this footage here that Greta was none too impressed. The President hadn't been due to attend the conference. He did deign to turn up for 15 minutes or so to listen. He then disappeared off to host a press conference on religious freedoms, of all things. Greta didn't stick around either. She went off to attend a press conference with a group of other teenagers. I got a chance to ask her a question there. Let's listen to what she had to say.
I just wonder, is there any point to this climate change summit, this global summit, if the US, one of the biggest polluters, doesn't bother to show up?
Of course it's a point, because everything matters, everything we do matters, and this is a huge opportunity for world leaders to actually prove that they are united behind the science and that they are going to take real action. So no, I don't think this is wasted. I just hope something good will come out of it. I hope it will have a good outcome, but we also have to prepare ourselves for the worst and continue even though if it has a bad outcome.
Well, Siobhan, if the environment isn't front and centre of President Trump's agenda, what is?
Well, Kathy, President Trump is due to address the conference tomorrow morning. In the past, he hasn't, of course, talked about climate change. He's used the stage rather to attack Iran and China. And given the escalating tensions in the Gulf, I think it's fair enough to say we could expect him to probably do exactly the same again tomorrow. The big question, of course, is whether or not President Trump will meet with his counterpart Hassan Rouhani of Iran tomorrow. Both presidents have insisted that that will not happen. Earlier today, though, President Macron of France has said he is due to meet with both presidents and will do his best to bring them together to try to bridge that divide. Remember, of course, that President Trump is a man who delights almost from meeting his adversaries. So while he may not meet with President Rouhani this trip, never say never for the future, Kathy.
Siobhan, thanks very much.
Well, perhaps the biggest star of the climate change conference in New York is the 16-year-old campaigner Greta Thunberg. Over the past year, it has been her calmness as well as her arguments that have captivated millions and changed minds around the world. Well, today, on just about the biggest stage there is at the United Nations, Greta Thunberg got angry. She accused world leaders of stealing her dreams with their empty words on protecting the planet. How dare you, she said.
This building has seen many passionate calls to action over its 74-year history, but few as electrifying as this.
Right here, right now, is where we draw the line.
Greta Thunberg rebuking world leaders to their faces.
You all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
Mr. President, welcome to...
The man who extols economic growth above all else was not in the audience for that. But President Trump did later attend the climate summit for all of 10 minutes. At one point, as she was in the corridor, Trump passed Greta without seeing her. A Swedish teenager and an American president, two colliding forces on the great issue of our age. Greta's scathing assessment, though, was intended for all world leaders.
And you are still not mature enough to tell it like it is. You are failing us. But the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you.
Her campaign is drawing the attention of some of the most significant players who are here for the climate change conference. Tonight, she has been meeting with Angela Merkel.
Climate change is not a lie! Do not let our planet die!
But the question is whether the mobilization of so many protesters and Greta's powerful plea for action can change policies on a truly global scale. The UN Secretary General says the dynamics here are changing, not least because of this generational call to arms. And that, he says, makes him hopeful that serious, radical reform on climate change is now within reach. Robert Moore, News at 10 at the United Nations.